June of this year, I raised concerns about the FBI's use of restricted access and prohibited access systems. According to the FBI, quote, when search teams
deployed at the FBI, we are doing a prospective and retrospective analyses of individuals who may have weaponized the department and the agency. And as I've committed to you during my confirmation hearing and my conversations with you, this FBI will not be weaponized anymore in either side of the aisle.
How are you ensuring that restricted access and prohibited access files are produced to Congress during court cases? And have you identified any Biden family records in restricted and prohibited status?
As I've committed to you with my transparency initiative, whether it's restrictive or prohibited, every single thing we can legally provide to Congress, we will. We've also restructured how these restrictive and prohibited cases are labeled and provided access to more people in the chain of command so that more people have knowledge of what these restricted and prohibited cases are, including myself and the deputy.
An assassination, a fast-made suspect, and whispers of an invisible hand have turned what should be a straightforward investigation into a tangle of sealed files and public suspicion. If you want first-hand updates on this developing story and others, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now. The story that follows stitches together the widely reported sequence, the troubling gaps critics describe, and the kinds of evidence that would either confirm or refute a far-reaching claim that Tyler Robinson was not simply a suspect but a scapegoat in an operation that involved restricted systems, hurried narrative control, and the suppression of witnesses. I will not assert conspiracy as fact. I will describe the allegations, the implications, and the concrete steps that should be taken to get at the truth. Where claims are serious about federal intervention, gag orders, or deliberate evidence redaction, they deserve scrutiny through independent review, not circulation as untested rumor. Keep that standard in mind as you read. Start with federal scrutiny of restricted access systems and concealed records. Multiple voices now say that investigators encountered and then quickly restricted access to key digital systems and server logs tied to the event. That allegation, if true, is the hinge of the larger narrative. Public events today generate an enormous digital trace. Venue security systems, campus access logs, building badge records, wireline and wireless video feeds, and third-party vendor servers. If some of those systems were on networks guarded by federal protocols, classified connections, leased back-end services, or private contractors with national security clearances, then it is plausible that federal agents would assert a need to secure and limit access to protect sources, methods, or other sensitive operations. The claim being made publicly, however, is that those restrictions proceeded under the pretext of national security to withhold material that would complicate the early, neat account of a single shooter and a single weapon tied to Tyler Robinson. Why would that matter? Because when investigators lock down certain systems and redact documents, they create an evidentiary asymmetry. Defense counsel, independent auditors, and the public are left to accept prosecutorial assurances without seeing the underlying records. In ordinary criminal cases, courts insist on chain of custody logs and discovery that show who handled which files and what redactions were made. When national security assertions enter the picture, the law recognizes legitimate reasons for secrecy, but it also provides mechanisms, such as in-camera judicial review or security-cleared defense counsel, to prevent secrecy from becoming a shield for concealment. The critical question is whether those oversight mechanisms were used here and, if so, whether their use was documented and subject to judicial scrutiny. If not, the appearance of protected systems being used as a curtain raises a serious public policy problem. Secrecy designed to protect the public should not be allowed to protect the guilty. Closely tied to that is how the public narrative formed so swiftly. The allegation shared by many observers is simple and unnerving. Tyler Robinson was branded in public statements as the shooter before physical evidence and raw footage were widely disclosed. In modern policing, swift arrests are common and often necessary. Probable cause can develop rapidly from a mixture of eyewitness reports, surveillance leads, and secure tips. But the problem is not the arrest itself. It is the way the arrest was narrated. When a prosecutor or agency gives a strongly worded account that frames the suspect as the unambiguous actor and the public has not been shown the underlying proof, perception hardens fast. Media outlets repeat the messaging, social feeds consolidate the story, and an early narrative can become the lens through which all subsequent evidence is interpreted. The risk, confirmation bias among both investigators and the public, and pressure on labs and witnesses to conform their outputs to an accepted account. Compounding that concern is a pattern many critics have noticed in media coverage. Reporters across outlets sometimes used strikingly similar language in early stories, the same phrases, the same sequence of facts, the same emphasis points, which fueled allegations that coverage was coordinated or at least highly guided by official statements. This is an old pattern. In fast-breaking events, outlets rely on the same pool briefings, wire copy, and official press releases. The result looks like a uniform narrative even when each outlet is independently reporting. But when that uniformity coincides with missing raw footage or sealed lab reports, it feeds public suspicion that an orchestrated narrative was preferred to an open investigation. Whether this uniformity results from newsroom pressure, official briefing strategies, or commercial incentives to be first on the story, it should not replace independent reporting that asks uncomfortable questions. Observers go further and say federal agencies moved quickly, almost preemptively, to seize evidence and redact documents under claims of national security sensitivity. Again, there are legitimate reasons federal agencies can intervene. If material touches classified infrastructure, if evidence implicates a national security program, or if releasing records would reveal intelligence sources. But those are narrow and serious justifications. When redactions are broad and the public explanation thin, the absence of accountable oversight generates a corrosive skepticism. Courts can and should mediate this tension. Judges with proper clearances can review sealed materials in camera and issue public summaries that balance the need for secrecy with the public's right to understand the trajectory of an investigation. Where such judicial balancing does not occur, or where summaries are evasive, the result is a story in which secrecy looks less like protection and more like preservation of a preferred narrative. That secrecy, critics say, also helps explain reports of a ghost figure seen by several witnesses near restricted zones before and after the incident. The image of a ghost figure is striking and evocative, a person who is not on attendee lists, who moves without purpose that observers could explain, who appears in peripheral camera angles and then vanishes. Eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable in isolation. Stress, low light, and the chaos of a sudden event distort memory. But when multiple unrelated witnesses describe a similar unexplained presence, the claim becomes testable rather than merely anecdotal. The investigative task is simple in outline: preserve every piece of raw footage, synchronize time bases across cameras, and see whether a putative figure appears in independent streams with consistent timestamps and appearance. If such a person exists, the implications are substantial. They could be a security contractor, an undercover agent, an attendee unknown to the public, or someone with malicious intent. If they do not exist and the ghost figure dissolves under forensic scrutiny, that too must be shown transparently to clear suspicion. Timeline inconsistencies form another pillar of the complaint. Analysts and defense counsel alike point to missing footage, contradictory badge logs, and altered movement data that do not line up with the official chronology. Digital systems are fallible. Cameras glitch, clocks drift, and retention policies overwrite old files. But when errors cluster at the most consequential moments and when badge logs show improbable entries or deletions, the result is a mosaic of doubt. For example, if an access control log shows a badge pass that the camera footage does not corroborate, investigators must show the raw device logs, the firmware status of the badge reader, and any manual overrides. If timestamps have been shifted in exported video, analysts must document the synchronization procedure used and provide the original unadjusted time base for independent testing. The integrity of an investigation rests on such forensic transparency. Without it, opposing narratives can both claim plausibility while neither can be decisively tested by neutral observers. This entire pattern of restricted systems, rapid narrative formation, coordinated media language, and timeline oddities feeds a darker hypothesis many in the public now whisper, that there was some undercover or covert operation at play and that Tyler Robinson became a convenient scapegoat. In this version, a covert operative or operation had motives unrelated to the public event. Something went wrong. A visible suspect was quickly identified to divert attention, and material tying to operational lines was sealed. That hypothesis explains the rapid federal involvement and the redactions. It is important to emphasize that this explanation is speculative. Covert operations do exist, and the law provides mechanisms to protect real national security interests, but those mechanisms also create opportunities for misuse. The place for deciding whether such a scenario is true is the courts, with judicial review of classified and sealed materials by judges with appropriate security clearances, and, where necessary, hearings with cleared counsel and independent experts. The human cost of these controversies is not theoretical. Witnesses and insiders who might know more are said to have been faced with gag orders, pressure to stay silent, or even intimidation. If true, such tactics are unconscionable. They can obstruct justice and punish people for speaking the truth. Yet allegations of intimidation are often difficult to prove and easy to allege. A person can feel pressured in many ways, through a brusque request from an investigator, a counsel's advice about safety, or more explicit threats. Investigative integrity requires that allegations of improper pressure be themselves investigated by an independent body, ideally a prosecutor with no stake in the originating agency. Where gag orders are legally issued for compelling reasons, witness safety, grand jury secrecy, courts should explain the legal basis in a way that reassures the public about process while protecting legitimate confidentiality. Public reaction to all this has naturally split. Some people see the early narrative and believe the suspect's guilt is manifest. The public wants swift accountability and is inclined to trust law enforcement's early assessment. Others read the sealed files, simultaneous redactions, and the suspicious uniformity of early reporting and conclude that something larger is being hidden. That polarization is predictable but dangerous. It forces the justice system to carry the extra burden of not only establishing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but also of repairing public faith by showing how evidence supports the conclusion in a manner that respects both secrecy where needed and transparency where possible. What, then, are the practical takeaways? First, any legitimate national security claim that results in redactions must be subject to meaningful judicial review, with summaries offered to the public so that secrecy cannot function as a general-purpose shield. Second, courts should use cleared counsel and neutral experts to vet sealed materials and, where possible, allow defense teams access under strict protective orders so that adversarial testing can occur. Third, investigative agencies must document preservation orders, chain of custody logs, and the exact technical steps taken when exporting and synchronizing footage so third-party verification is possible. Fourth, media organizations need to preserve original source materials when reporting and should be transparent about relying on agency briefings versus independent verification. Fifth, independent oversight, whether from an inspector general, a special prosecutor, or a court-appointed auditor, should be used whenever allegations of suppression, intimidation, or tampering arise. At the heart of the matter is a single, stubborn question. Who profited from making Tyler Robinson the center of attention so soon? That is not an idle political question. It is a forensic one. Profit, in this sense, can be reputational protection, preservation of a covert program, shielding of institutional errors, or simple narrative convenience. Determining the answer requires access to sealed materials or to a judicial process that can certify whether secrecy was invoked for valid reasons. The public's right to know has limits, but those limits cannot be the default mechanism for avoiding accountability. Wrap up. The allegations here are explosive, restricted systems and redacted logs that look like a cover, a fast-formed public narrative that placed a suspect at the scene before raw evidence was publicly tested, reports of a ghost figure, and witness pressure. None of those claims should be accepted at face value without independent review. Nor should they be dismissed without examination. The correct civic response is procedural, demand in court, security-cleared review of sealed records, Insist on court-managed discovery for defense counsel under protective orders. Require public summaries that explain why redactions are necessary and for how long, and support an inspector general or special prosecutor review if ordinary investigative channels cannot answer the public's concerns. Until those steps happen, the story will remain a contested ledger of plausible explanations rather than a settled account of fact. If there was no covert program and the rapid federal involvement was genuinely protective of national interests, a transparent, judge-led declassification or carefully written summary will clear that up. If there were improper efforts to protect powerful actors by sacrificing a single suspect, procedural review will expose and correct that injustice. Demand that process. Demand independent scrutiny. Only documented process, not conspiracy thinking or reflexive trust, will deliver the truth and restore the public's faith that justice is being done, not staged.